What are your worst college roommate horror stories? Story 1. I lived with a creep and don't know how I survived. This story began about 3 years ago. It was a weekend, and as usual, I was at the school library studying. It wasn't exam time or midterm season, so the place was nearly empty. Just me and a few other students. After a couple of hours, I noticed a guy walking toward my table. He was dressed head to toe in silver. Silver suit, silver shoes, silver fedora, silver tie, everything. He was a pale, ghostly-looking Asian man with bleach blonde hair. Fine, whatever. I didn't judge. But then, with nearly every seat empty, he sat down right next to me. I kept working, and he started talking. "I am not from here. Can you help me connect to the internet?" I spent a few minutes explaining that he needed a temporary password from the help desk and pointed him there. He left, but 5 minutes later, he came back and sat next to me again. This time, he noticed I had Facebook open and leaned over. "Can you add me on Facebook so we can be friends?" I politely declined, but he insisted, saying something like, "But you already have it open. It'll be easy. This way we can keep in contact." I felt creeped out, said no again, and he finally left. Fast forward 2 years, I was living in a house with 3 other guys. We all got along well, but in January we had 1 room still available, and our landlord was eager to fill it. One night, I came home late to find my roommates hanging out in the living room. As soon as I walked in, they said, "We're going to die." I asked what was going on. Some creepy-looking guy came to check out the house. Something about him just wasn't right, they explained. I sighed and went to my room after they told me he'd be moving in sometime the following week. I was lying in bed when I heard a lot of movement upstairs. About an hour later, I went up to see what my roommates were doing. It turned out to be the new guy. His room was right above mine, and he was putting his bed together with his back turned to me. I knocked on the door and started to introduce myself. "Hey, I am Anne," but before I could finish, he turned around. It was the same guy from the library. Same creepy guy. "Before you tell me not to judge too quickly, here's what happened while he lived with us." 1. In the first few days, he told us he had $30,000 invested in stocks. One day, while living at his old place, he said he got a call from his internet company or something like that. And that same day, he lost all $30,000. According to him, the company hacked his laptop and stole it. 2. He claimed he had attended Harvard for a year and already held 7 patents. I never asked what they were. 3. There's a local bar near our house, and he went there every Wednesday. He insisted the owner was pumping something through the air to make everyone in the bar hate him. 4. He believed his former roommates blew drugs through his vents to keep him high all the time. 5. One day, he got a nosebleed in our house and became convinced we were pumping something through the vents to drug him. 6. During the first week, he wore a helmet to school. He didn't bike, he took the bus. One evening, I caught a late bus home, and he was on it. He called me over to sit next to him while wearing this pink bike helmet. I sat down because I didn't want to be rude. When we got home, the first thing my roommates asked him was, "Why the heck are you wearing that?" His answer, "I am currently back in stock or something, and I don't want people stealing information from my head. It protects me." 7. One day, I was sick and stayed in bed feeling awful. Since my room was downstairs, I had my own washroom, but with him living on the main floor, he started using mine. I hadn't stepped in there all day, yet he used it about 10 times. I don't know what he was doing, but the sink was always running, and I am pretty sure he washed his hair in it. That evening, I finally dragged myself out of bed to brush my teeth before hockey. My toothbrush was soaked completely drenched, and I hadn't even used it yet. He had just been in the washroom. I went upstairs, knocked on his door and asked, "Did you just use my toothbrush? It's wet." He said, No, I already had to return a toothbrush to the store because when I bought it, it was wet." I went back down, grabbed everything in that washroom, and threw it all in the garbage. 8. After not eating for about 3 days, he devoured 2 full boxes of chicken strips in one sitting. 9. One of my roommates is really into cycling and went to his bike shop one day. The weird roommate was there too. My normal roommate saw him through the glass and decided to come back later to avoid him. Later, when he asked the creep why he was at the shop, the guy freaked out, accusing us of videotaping and stalking him. 10. One of my roommate's moms was our landlord. Strangely, she allowed this guy to move in without ever meeting him. At one point, he emailed her, claiming her son was messing around in front of him and that he didn't feel safe living with us. She emailed her son back saying, "I hope this isn't true." When my roommate found out, he absolutely lost it on the creep. I'd never seen him that angry before. 11. The creep looked me in the eye and said, "I am on to you guys. You think the cereal code on the Kraft dinner is coincidental. I know what that means. You can't fool me." 12. He went to my dean and demanded a job as a teacher, claiming he could make everyone he taught famous. The dean declined, so he sent the school a harassment letter. 13. One day, we got a letter from the U.S. Department of Justice addressed to a name none of us recognized. I am from Canada, so my roommate opened it out of curiosity. It turned out the guy living with us had used a false name. From what we could tell, he had sent in his fingerprints to request a copy of his record. The letter said, "A search of the fingerprints provided by this individual has revealed prior arrest data at the FBI. This does not preclude further criminal history at the state or local level." Apparently, he was an illegal immigrant in the States and had been kicked out. I don't know the full details. After his 4 months were up, he emailed my landlord asking for a refund, claiming we treated him like crap. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. My college dorm roommate was the ultimate combination of lousy, basically the living embodiment of Jerk Steve. We got along fine at first, but it slowly turned into mutual hatred. Here's how it started. His best friend was a girl who lived across campus, and he was obsessed with sleeping with her. He told me all about it during our first real conversation. The problem was, she was already seeing one of his friends from back home, on and off. A few weeks into the semester, he gave up on her and decided he wanted her roommate instead. So he started inviting his friend and her roommate over for late-night hangouts and went after the roommate hard. Eventually, they started hooking up, and things got awkward for his friend. She began spending more time with me, sometimes even sleeping in my bed, and it became a regular thing. Over time, he got bored of his little romance, but by then she and I had become friends. When her messy relationship finally ended, on decent terms, she and I started seeing each other. So this jerk got mad that his lady friend liked me. He even told me I was being inconsiderate, and immediately invited her former lover, his friend from back home, to visit. But that wasn't enough. To escalate things, he invited a bunch of other people over and made sure the guy from back home didn't have a place to stay in our room. The guy ended up asking the girl for a place to crash, and my roommate later told me they slept together. Looking back, I realize I should have talked to her to confirm whether it actually happened. But at 18, inexperienced, I didn't handle it well. The incident killed the momentum I had with her. We still hooked up occasionally for a while, but I felt awkward. When we finally tried to talk about us, I was angry and hurt and ended up saying I wasn't ready for something serious and was worried about her feelings for the other guy. We drifted apart. Later, when I realized my roommate was a compulsive, manipulative liar, it occurred to me that nothing probably even happened. He wasn't done sabotaging my romances. A couple of weeks later, I met an amazing girl on a bus ride home. I probably told him too much about her. I even mentioned I was inviting her to a party. At the party, he spent the whole night feeding her drinks. Every time I was around, he'd walk over and start chatting her up. We stayed until the party ended, and he invited her back to our place. I was exhausted, but trying to keep things cool. She was being polite and hanging out on our futon, talking to both of us. Then, while she and I were having a small moment, he suddenly whipped out his guitar. For context, I played guitar in a band at the time, and this guy knew maybe 4 chords, and he started serenading her. She clearly wasn't into him, but he wouldn't stop. By the time we walked her home a little after dawn, he still wouldn't leave. I confronted him about not being a jerk, and he basically shrugged. "Well, you just met her too, so fair game." That was his philosophy. He read every how to pick up women book he could find and became a total dirtbag. And that's just the romantic side of it. There's plenty more to his chaos beyond that. The guitar thing reminds me of an even better story. He knew a few chords and could sing okay, but he was just starting to learn the instrument. That clearly wasn't getting him enough attention, so he went a step further. He made a website for his band. Basically, a couple of his friends from back home jammed with him once, and suddenly it was officially a band. A few weeks later, while we were hanging out at a party with a larger group of friends, he stepped away to take a phone call. According to him, his band had just gotten a record deal. Epic Records supposedly called, telling him to come in and sign paperwork for their first record. I think I said something like, "I don't think that's how it works. They don't even have any material yet." But people accused me of being a competitive jerk for questioning it. For the next 2 or 3 weeks, people kept coming by our dorm to congratulate him. He had these canned responses like, "Thanks, buddy, we're really excited." It got beyond annoying when he started offering to autograph random things. Obviously, he didn't have a record deal. As far as I know, his band never even practiced again. But for a while, everyone in a 2-mile radius had heard about my roommate's fake contract. Our friend group eventually drifted away once it became clear he had made it all up, though nobody ever directly acknowledged what happened. Anyway, I will close with a few other highlights. If my alarm went off and our beds were bunked, so that was every weekday, he would punch my bed repeatedly from underneath until I turned it off. He hit so hard his knuckles would bleed. I hated him so much that I'd sometimes let the alarm ring for 30 seconds just so he'd hurt himself. I brought a girl home once, early in the spring semester. We were quietly making out unclothed in my bed when he woke up, stood up, and yelled, "Who are you?" at her until I told him to stop. Needless to say, we didn't continue. One night, I was on my way home when he texted me, demanding I sleep somewhere else because he had already promised my bed to a friend. When I refused, we got into a huge fight. I was staying at a friend's place one night when he showed up in some kind of drug and/or alcohol-induced rage. He screamed at me for stealing his liquor. That same night, he threw a party in our room and couldn't find a bottle of something, so apparently I had taken it. He would invite women over on weeknights and do their thing right on the futon, in plain view. I ended up sleeping with headphones on, just to cope. He genuinely believed that toasters burned off all the calories from food. We didn't even live together for a full year. I've had a few bad roommates over the years, but nobody even comes close to him. Story 3. I had some less than ideal luck with roommates in college. I went to a university where residence life is a big deal. There's no Greek life, so most students live on campus, and about half stay in the dorms all 4 years. When things go right, it's actually a really cool experience. Over 5 years, I had a total of 15 different roommates, and most of them were great. Sophomore year, I lived in a 6-man arrangement with some guys from my hallway and my 2 freshman year roommates. Everything started off well, but the group dynamics gradually shifted, and a rift developed between me and some of the others. At the time, I was dealing with some serious personal issues at home that, in hindsight, I should have addressed and at least shared with them. I had turned into a pretty salty guy, and looking back I realized I caused a lot of the tension. Still, things continued to get unpleasant until they finally came to a head in what I call the Battle of the Fan. A bit of context. I was an engineering student at a quality school, so I focused on working hard and doing well. I didn't drink, not because I judged people who did, but because I am fine having fun without breaking the law. The roommate I had the biggest conflict with, whom I will call Dan, was a neat, interesting, well-connected guy. He was a liberal arts major and had enough going for him that he didn't need to grind academically like I did, so our schedules and habits didn't always match. The problem started in the spring semester. I was trying to get to sleep between midnight and 1 a.m., but Dan and some of the other guys liked to stay up much later, 3 or 4 in the morning. The dorm we lived in, God bless it, didn't have air conditioning. We were on the 4th floor in a cramped setup with a lot of guys, so everyone used little clip-on fans at night for some circulation. Dan generally liked to leave his on all the time, which wouldn't have been a big deal, except the fan was absurdly loud. I mean extreme, like he'd stolen it from a Spinal Tap concert. Since I went to bed much earlier than Dan, and because we shared a room with one other guy who was rarely there, I would casually turn Dan's fan off when I went to sleep. It had never been an issue when he came in later and turned it back on. I had already been explicit about this arrangement. For some reason, though, Dan was obsessed with keeping his fan on 24/7. I discovered this one night when I went to turn the fan off before climbing up to my loft. A bunch of green masking tape had been placed over the switch. I thought it was odd, but assumed it had fallen and cracked or something. I lifted the tape, shut off the fan, and went to sleep. The next night, I went to turn the fan off and found that the green tape had been reinforced with clear packing tape. It was much tighter and harder to remove, but I still managed to get it off and shut the fan down. Dan was out that night and didn't respond to a text I sent, and I hadn't seen him in the room for a couple of days because of our conflicting schedules, so I never got an explanation. By the third day, I realized something was seriously up. I ran into Dan after my morning class. He had just gotten out of the shower, and it was obvious he had used my shampoo. I wouldn't have minded if he had asked, but he didn't. Not wanting to be confrontational after 3 days of limited contact, I asked if he'd seen our other roommate using it, hoping he might casually mention that he had. He said he hadn't seen anyone, and the interaction was awkward. That night, the fan was essentially trapped in a cocoon of tape, too much for me to remove. I was frustrated, and with Dan nowhere around to confront, I unplugged the fan from the extension cord he had strung up to his loft and went to sleep. It continued like this for a while, with escalating attempts to stop me from turning off a fan that he wouldn't be using for at least a few hours so I could sleep without a foghorn blaring in my face. Dan purchased a lockbox to cover the extension cord plug, preventing me from unplugging it there. I responded by unplugging the extension cord from the wall before going to bed. Not to be outdone, Dan moved the modular desk supporting his bed in front of the wall plug so I couldn't unplug the cord from the wall either. It was a ridiculous amount of effort to prevent me from turning off a nuisance that wasn't even in use, and to this day, I still have no explanation for his behavior. Fed up with the fan situation and feeling increasingly isolated because of what was going on at home, compounded by my roommates passively siding with Dan, I angrily moved the desk away from the wall to unplug the cord, leaving it askew. By this point, the semester was winding down, and we had to reset the 6-man setup with 2 lofted beds in each of the 3 rooms. One day, Dan moved his bed back while I was out, and the guys who slept in the middle rooms returned the common room couches to the center room. There were doors connecting the rooms, one of which we had kept permanently open to make the sleeping arrangements work. When they returned the couches, they closed the door to my room, of which I was now effectively the sole occupant, and blocked it with a couch. Not once did anyone even pretend to care that I had been physically isolated from the rest of the group for the last 2 weeks of the semester. Dan and some of the other guys moved off campus the following year. We've had 1 or 2 awkward run-ins since, but that's the end of it. On a brighter note, one of the guys there became my best friend, and I am still on good terms with a couple of the others. Story 4. This is from the most recent semester, and I don't know if it'll get buried, but here we go. It was my second semester of college. My first roommate was great. We're still pretty good friends. Since I started in the spring, roommates were already being swapped out, so as usual in the fall, most freshmen were fresh out of high school. When I got on campus to unpack, I walked into my room and found my new roommate and his friend playing COD. Nothing unusual. I unpacked, and we went to the freshman fair. We got talking, and everything seemed fine. He mentioned that he dips, and I thought, no problem. That's not a big deal. The first couple of weeks were fine. He was a little messy, but nothing serious. After a few weeks, though, I started noticing that he didn't shower very often. He would go to class, and then come back to play COD, and this routine went on for a while. Well, he and I ended up joining a frat, and that's where he met his friend. The 2 of them hung out frequently, and both of them dipped. As you can imagine, the room quickly reeked of tobacco. They would save their water bottles to spit in, which only made things worse. The bottles were disgusting and full of tobacco spit. By this point, I had been spending most of my time out of the room because of the smell, and I have a pretty sensitive sense of smell. The problem was, I still had to sleep in that room, and he and his friend were constantly there playing COD. If I was lucky, they'd be gone for a little while. Midway through the semester, my roommate started letting his friend live in our room. He kind of ran it by me, saying, "Oh, he is going to live in here now, cool?" I jokingly agreed, not realizing he was serious. With both of them now living in the room, things started going downhill. They continued their usual habits, playing COD and dipping, and the room reeked. After Labor Day weekend, I noticed the smell had gotten even worse. I asked my roommate what was going on, and he said, "Oh yeah, I think the milk in my mini fridge busted open and spoiled." Now, imagine the mixture of tobacco and spoiled milk. It was not a pretty smell. At this point, I stopped inviting friends to my room because I was so embarrassed about the smell. After a while, I noticed that my roommate and his friend weren't going to their classes. They just stayed up playing COD or watching Netflix. As you can imagine, this started affecting me. I couldn't get any rest because I had to deal with the awful smell, now mixed with horrible body odor since neither of them had showered, along with constant noise blasting in my ears. I had convinced myself it couldn't get any worse, and I was so wrong. Right before Thanksgiving break, my roommate brought 3 coolers into my room, which belonged to his friend. By this point, I had pretty much given up, so I didn't ask many questions. After the break, I got a message from him saying he wasn't coming back. He was only stopping by to pick up his stuff. He came to pick up most of his things, except for a few items that are still in the room even after the semester ended. His friend's coolers, however, remained. I was ecstatic at first, imagining the room would start smelling better, but instead it got worse. I didn't know why. I had been spraying full cans of air freshener, but the stench wouldn't go away. I messaged my roommate to ask what was causing it, and he told me it was the coolers. He and his friend had gone hunting and brought deer meat back to the room in one of them. I was mortified, rotting deer meat in the room I was sleeping in. I was furious. I harassed his friend, who no longer lived there, to get the coolers out. Even then, it took 3 whole days for him to remove them. On the 3rd day, before his friend showed up, I made one of the worst mistakes of my life. My roommate had left a bunch of stuff on top of the cooler, so I took it all off and decided to haul the cooler myself. For some reason, I opened it and was immediately hit with the most potent, disgusting scent I've ever encountered. It literally threw me back. I shut it immediately. Not even 20 minutes later, his friend arrived, and we hauled the cooler out. By then I realized it had been stinking up the entire hallway. We trashed it. When I got back into my room, it still smelled bad from lingering odor, but after 4 cans of air freshener and a bottle of Febreze, it finally smelled decent. Living there after that was much easier. Not perfect, because he still had his mini fridge and a bunch of smelly clothes, but it was at least habitable. As the semester was ending, I had to clean up all the disgusting tobacco and milk stains in the carpet, along with trash stains on the tile. Oh, and the sink, almost forgot about that. There was an orange and black stain around the drain where they had been tossing old dip, ramen soup, and who knows what else. Cleaning it took 30 minutes and nearly drove me insane. This past semester was a living hell. It took a serious toll on my GPA and my overall psyche. I am crossing my fingers that next semester treats me better so I don't fail out of college. Story 5. I am not the type of person who can keep people once I talk to them. I expected having a roommate to be great. We'd always be around for one another. Well, it turns out she was weird. I mean, I know I am weird, but she was on another planet. She used to demand that her mother put her dog on FaceTime, then talk to the dog for 20 minutes, and then insist her mother take the dog for a ride or a walk with her on video the whole time. I get missing your pet, but if I had told my mom to go out of her way to do that while I was busy cooking or cleaning or whatever mothers do when you're away at college, I probably would have been verbally scolded. And it wasn't, "Mom, can you do this for Pookie?" It was more like, "Mom, right now, out the door, take Pookie for a walk. No, you have to do it now, right now," followed by whining. But that's not the main issue. She and a kid I knew from high school hit it off. They were inseparable for a week at the start of school, and he even had a crush on her. When he finally decided to be upfront about it, she immediately suggested they start dating. Not 5 minutes later, she tells him, "Never mind, I don't want to." Suddenly, she starts avoiding him and claiming he's harassing her. I had him over to play games with me, and she went to the RA, insisting that he must have been harassing her. I even got a talking to because I had invited him over while she was out. And this happened more than once. Another incident, when the author of Where the Wild Things Are passed away, she began giggling at his name. She then called her sister to mock it and demanded that her father get on the phone so she could mock it with him, saying it was awful and that she was glad he was dead. I, being bitter because I had recently lost my stepfather, whom I was very close to, and my great-grandfather only a few months earlier, told her to shut up. I pointed out that she was being rude, disrespectful, and completely inappropriate. There is no reason to laugh at someone's passing, regardless of their name. They left behind a legacy, along with friends, family, and followers who were grieving. She told me to mind my own business. I reminded her that since she was yelling about it 5 feet from me, it was very much my business. After a suitmate accidentally found some explicit manga in my closet, we became best friends. She was just getting me into Doctor Who, and we were nearing the season finale of the 9th Doctor and Rose. One night, my roommate came in after drinking. We had to pause the show because she drunkenly started talking to us, asking my suitmate about life as a lesbian and chatting about life in general for 40 minutes to an hour. Suddenly, 2 more suitmates returned from their own night out, giving hugs and sharing stories. My roommate, already drunk, was giggling about how wonderful the evening was, despite having just cried about how strange the world was, tears and all. She became so drunk that she was slurring her words and swaying. I ignored her and went back to Doctor Who with my first friend, Olivia. We watched as the suitmates helped my roommate into her 5.5-foot-high lofted bed, tucked her in, gave her crackers, and set out water, all while they were actually drunk, unlike her. She then started yelling and taunting us, threatening to get out of bed. Olivia urged her to stay put, while I just scowled at her for being rude and lying about her state. She then crawled out of bed and on her hands and knees made her way to the bathroom. I listened as she stood up, shut the door, went to the bathroom, dropped to the floor again, and crawled back. Mind you, she'd left the door open the whole time. After somehow hoisting herself back onto the bed, she decided it was time to settle in. She hurled her jewelry at us and demanded that Olivia protect it for the night. She started taking her clothes off, tossing them haphazardly onto the floor. I got up to grab something from my closet that one of the other suitmates had asked to borrow, when suddenly I felt something on my shoulder. I looked over. It was her freaking inners, that lacy black thing I never wanted to see in my life. I am not one for fighting or violence, but if Olivia hadn't been there, I probably would have lost it. Olivia pushed me back to my bed, sat between us, and told me to focus on the TV instead of the sub-drunken ramblings of my roommate. Eventually, she fell asleep, and I begged Olivia to trade rooms with her. Sadly, she couldn't. Morning came, and not a single word, no apology, not even a glance in my direction. Olivia had slept under my bed the night before to try to scare her as payback, but she went straight to the shower, leaving Olivia uncomfortable. She would change in the room with me there. I'd be doing homework, and suddenly she'd wander in, toss her towel on the floor, and start getting dressed. It's not a locker room. I do not need to see your saggy breasts, Marissa, if I don't want to. She'd even talk to me while doing it. Needless to say, when she lost her phone in a cab, I laughed in her face and told her she was messed up. I could have suggested she check it with the Find My iPhone app she had, but that would have been too kind. And the day she electrocuted herself on our lamp because she was too lazy to replace it, I laughed my buns off. She cried because she was hurt, but honestly, I would rather laugh than worry about her well-being. Story 6. The first time I moved out of my parents' house, I went into a student housing apartment with 4 rooms. I quickly learned they don't check if you're actually a student or do background checks. Roommate 1 was a 35-year-old mess. Face tattoos, long greasy hair, a huge gauge septum piercing, and he never showered. He would come home late at night, high on every drug imaginable, and proceed to destroy our stuff couch, walls, and my super nice futon cushion my mom got me just before I moved out. R.I.P. futon cushion. Then he would write on the walls in what looked like blood. Messages like, "Screw you wusses, die, and hail Satan." I am a girl and lived on the opposite side of the apartment, and he would sometimes try to jiggle my door handle at 4 in the morning. I'd just pull my covers over my head and pray he'd go away. When I confronted him about the damage, he'd just laugh and say, "Ha ha. Yeah, last night was crazy." Roommate 2 was a foreign exchange student from Korea. I may have said 5 words to him the entire time we lived there. He wore the same orange shirt, blue basketball shorts, and sandals with socks every single day. He was the most inexperienced man I had ever seen. We tried to get him to party with us, and he politely but firmly declined every time. He would shuffle out of his room to get food as quickly as possible and scurry back. His lights were on 24/7. I think he was terrified of our crack-out roommates stabbing him in the night, so he just slept with the lights on. The highlight of living with him? I once caught him dancing to Cher. That was a good day. Roommate 3 was, without exaggeration, the dumbest person I had ever met. She would get drunk and throw up in her bed. Her gums were constantly bleeding, like, "Get that checked, bro." She asked if it was okay to get a dog. I love dogs, so I said, "Sure, as long as you train it and it doesn't destroy everything." She got a puppy, and of course, the dog peed and pooped everywhere. Our carpet was a disaster, covered in huge stains, and she never cleaned it. Then the dog broke its leg. Instead of fixing it, she went and got a huge tattoo. She was always broke, constantly relying on her parents for money. The dog's leg healed wrong and became unusable. Her brilliant solution? Get another dog. Within the first week, the new dog broke its leg, and she didn't have money to fix it, so she just had it put down. When I found out, I told her she was the worst person I had ever met and hoped she would never have children. I also told her she was a complete idiot, and natural selection should have taken her out years ago. I now live in a house from the 1800s, right in the middle of the city, with my 2 best friends, a perfect setup. My roommate had just met a guy on Tinder who had been working on a pot farm in California for months before they met. They talked all day, every day, and couldn't stand being apart. Eventually, my roommate flew to California to see him, and she was head over heels. She referred to him as her dreamboat. Ugh. When she came back, she made him sound incredible, like he was the one. I was genuinely happy for her and excited to meet him. He moved back to Austin, where we live, and stayed with us for the first 3 nights. My first impression was, this guy is awkward as heck and a total nerd, which was fine. Nerds can be cool. The problem was his stench, by far one of the worst-smelling humans I have ever encountered. Pure body odor central. He was a raging hippie and refused to wear deodorant because of the chemicals. Dude, I will happily douse myself in chemicals before I smell like a ferret cage that's never been cleaned. I couldn't stand hanging out with them. I couldn't even be in the same room. It got so bad that I stayed the night at a friend's place just to escape. Even when I invited my friends over, they would apologize and leave immediately because the smell was unbearable. One day, this guy was gone for 9 hours, and I came home from work and could still smell him. How is that even possible? On top of that, he turned our house into a drug den. He shipped 2 pounds of weed to our place under my roommate's name without her knowing, and then took over the kitchen to make drug cocktails. He had no job, no car, and no place to stay, and apparently assumed he was moving in with us. He does have a kid he's trying to gain custody of, which is just amazing considering how much kids apparently enjoy sleeping outside and starving. When he couldn't stay at our place, he would sleep behind Central Market. That's when it clicked. My roommate was dating a homeless person. I confronted her about his smell and pointed out his homelessness. She freaked out and immediately dumped him. It was either that or I would have ended him. So, that's a few of my stories. You really have to be a little psycho to survive living in this city. Everyone's just a bunch of crazy drunk animals. Story 7. I've never met anyone with a worse college roommate story than mine, so here goes. It was sophomore year, and I was living with 2 other females I had met freshman year. One girl was my best friend, and we were perfect roommates for each other. Our other roommate, however, was a completely different story. I had met her through my best friend, and since we had a lot of similar sorority events together, I assumed she was on the same academic, social, and finding yourself plane as I was. Oh, how wrong I was. Things went downhill after my best friend, on a whim, decided to apply to study abroad. She got accepted and was out of the country 3 weeks later. I returned to school expecting life in our apartment to continue as it had when the 3 of us lived together. Holy crap, was I wrong? Now it was just the 2 of us in a 3-bedroom, off-campus apartment. I was busy with school, sports, and my social life, so I went about my business as usual. My non-best friend roommate was a walk-on for one of our collegiate sports teams, so I assumed she was equally busy. After about 2 weeks, I noticed she was often home during her usual practice times. She was also getting more messed up than usual, which, to be fair, I didn't mind. It was college, and I wasn't exactly sober either. But I started noticing she was doing more than just the occasional smoke. Finally, I asked her what was going on. She casually mentioned that she had failed a drug test, got kicked off the team, and her parents didn't know. To her, it wasn't a big deal, and I didn't make it one either. It wasn't my life, but I couldn't help thinking it was weird that her parents weren't making more of it. I will get back to that later. Moving on, I noticed she started bringing a completely different crowd of friends to our apartment. And when I say different, I mean nothing like the typical straight Southern sorority girls we normally hung out with. I had honestly never seen openly masculine lesbians in my college town, but suddenly they were all hanging out at our place. I didn't care who my roommate was dating, but coming home to find random women in my BFF's empty room or on my couch was uncomfortable in my own space. Not to mention, she would let her friends crash at our place when she wasn't even home. I found this out the hard way. Returning from the gym, practically unclothed, I nearly had a heart attack when a girl appeared out of nowhere, and I thought I was home alone. Trying to be a decent roommate and give them space, I ended up spending most nights at my other friend's place. One night, I came home to find random strangers chilling in my room, apparently drawn to my nice TV. After that, my BFF and I decided enough was enough and had locks installed on our bedroom doors. At least we could now feel like our rooms weren't being occupied when we weren't home. This all happened over the course of about 2 months. About a week after installing the locks, I came home to cook some dinner and get ready for bed. As I was eating, my roommate approached me, wobbling unsteadily, and asked if I could unlock my BFF's room. She said she needed a disposable razor to shave, and also asked if I had one to spare for myself. When I told her no on both counts, she accused me of lying. She was so out of it that she could barely stand. By this point, I was completely fed up with the chaos that had started the moment my BFF left, so I basically lost it. I told her to bugger off and let me go to sleep. We argued for a bit, and I ended up locking myself in my room. Eventually, I calmed down and drifted off, though the tension lingered like the smell of burnt popcorn. Not long after, I was suddenly awakened by a knock at my bedroom door. Thinking it was her trying to pick another fight, I flung the door open and screamed, only to find 2 police officers standing there. My roommate was sprawled on the couch behind them. Thinking quickly about the greenery in my room, I closed the door and walked into the living room. I asked what was going on, and one officer explained that they wanted to make sure someone was there for her. That's when I learned the full story. After our argument, she had called some of her new friends and told them she was going to harm herself. Wisely, they called the cops. I had to sit there gathering my things while the officers instructed her to pull up her sleeves. After the third, pull it up higher, it became clear. It dawned on me that when she asked for the razors, it wasn't for shaving. Holy crap! The cops had to take her to the hospital. First, she told them her parents were out of the country and couldn't be reached. Less than 15 minutes later, she was gone with the police, and I was left sitting there thinking, what the heck just happened? The next day, I called my parents and told them everything, like everything. My dad, being the responsible adult he is, called her parents to inform them. Their response? You're lying. Our daughter wouldn't do that. Her parents had no idea. 3 days later, I heard a commotion in the kitchen. She had returned, accompanied by her dad. They were packing her things. I thought, finally, she's getting the help she needs. Nope. I soon found out her parents had simply moved her to a 1-bedroom apartment in the same complex and just left her there. Story 8. I didn't realize I had a perfect story until recently. I go to a Big Ten school and am in med school now, but did my undergrad at the same institution. Back then, I was a sophomore, majoring in the sciences, pre-med, and had a friend taking many of the same classes as me. This friend, let's call her Kay, is now in med school with me and is an absolute saint. She wasn't the problem in this story. Kay had a roommate during her freshman and sophomore years whom I'd met a few times. I didn't know him well, but Kay, an engineering major, seemed nice enough. She and another friend, Jay, proposed that we all live together in a 4-bedroom apartment. Jay had a friend I hadn't met before, whom we'll call Melanie. Things started off fine. Melanie claimed to be pre-med too, which seemed harmless. We moved in, got fish, everything normal. But on a trip to pick up the fish, Melanie casually told us about her time being institutionalized for an eating disorder and how she had pooped in the shower. Okay, a little off, but not a big deal. Turns out, that was just the beginning. Melanie had a constant need to feel better about herself through partying with Jay, getting wasted, bringing different guys home twice a week, and engaging in weekly walks of shame back to their room. She regularly peed their beds and sometimes herself. The smell was revolting. I tried to ignore it, but trust me, it gets worse. Fast forward a few months, Melanie and Jay are obnoxiously loud all the time. Remember, Kay and I are pre-med, we care about our grades. Melanie is now dating a 37-year-old drug dealer. One night, Melanie, being the enormous nasty flake she is, decides to blow him off to hook up with some other guy. It's 2 a.m. on a Saturday. I am trying to sleep when my phone rings. It's Melanie. Great. I am not about to go gallivanting at 2 a.m. to save her undoubtedly cootie-riddled self. 5 minutes later, Kay shows up at the top of the stairs. Our room is in the basement and calls my name. She had picked up Melanie's phone. Apparently, Melanie had pissed off her creepy drug dealer boyfriend. Her drunken wisdom led her to tell Kay to lock herself in Melanie's room and call the cops because the boyfriend had been calling for over 2 hours, threatening to friggle up your crap. Kay and I retreated to her room with the cat, telling Melanie to call the cops herself. Then we heard a brief banging on the main floor, the door to the patio courtyard, which anyone could see if the shades weren't drawn. The noise stopped, so Kay and I cautiously peeked out. The door was intact. Okay, for now. Melanie calls. The cops are on the way. Then Kay notices something wedged in the door. At first, we think it's one of those self-replicating Chinese food menus. Nope, it's a piece of newspaper with Melanie's handwriting, all girly, Sharpie hearts and everything, smeared with blood. It says, "I love you." We flip on the porch light and realize the entire glass patio door is covered in blood. What the heck is happening? We see a flashlight beam. Finally, the cops have arrived. We start telling them the story when up stumbles Melanie, her dress barely covering her, heels making her wobble, buns practically falling out. She spots the newspaper and blurts, "I wrote that in his newspaper this morning at his house." The cops take her outside to talk. When they return, we learn the truth. The drug dealer boyfriend hadn't said he'd friggle up your crap. No, he'd said, "I am going to end you and your roommates." The cops explained that Melanie had to tell us what he'd said so we'd understand the danger. To get her to at least file a restraining order, we told her we'd all do it, since he'd threatened us too. We practically had to drag her to the state capitol office where restraining orders are issued. Once there, we told her, "You did this, you get the restraining order." She still didn't want to, but we made it happen. Thankfully, that creepy drug dealer never came back around. But Melanie, ugh. She was a nightmare from the start and never wanted to take responsibility for putting us all in danger with her reckless choices. The worst part, we'd already signed the lease for the next year, and Jay took Melanie's side when I lost it over her irresponsibility. Kay, being conflict-averse, just stayed silent. There was plenty more chaos, but that night was the pinnacle of her recklessness. Last I heard, she applied to nursing school, didn't get in, and is now a CNA living back in Minnesota with her parents. Good riddance. As long as she's far away, I don't care. Screw you, Melanie. Story 9. Junior year of college, I was on the verge of transferring universities when I got a letter saying they had miscalculated my credits. I needed to stay put for one more quarter to finish 2 classes. A friend graciously offered to let me crash in her room for the quarter, and I was beyond grateful. Her house had one other roommate, and both of them were friendly, tidy, and just generally sane people. My friend, let's call her H, was sweet, unassuming, and pretty shy. She had recently lost a significant amount of weight, joined the cycling team, and taught herself to cook all this amazing food, which she generously shared around the house. Fast forward a month or so, and everything was going smoothly when H started talking about a coworker she had a crush on. Conveniently, he lived just a few blocks away. The crush went on for a month, with daily debriefs from H about whether he had talked to her, looked at her, or was even within 10 feet. One day, he invited H to a house party he was hosting, and she was absolutely thrilled. On the day of the party, Friday, H showed me and the other housemate her outfit options, pep-talking herself on how to handle the night, stay chill, and see what happened. We reminded her to take it easy on the booze, since she didn't know many people, and H promised to call us if she needed backup or a rescue mission. She eventually settled on a blue sequined sparkly dress and seemed to really feel herself. My housemate and I high-fived her and sent her off into the night. Shortly thereafter, I went to bed. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a string of nonsensical text from H. No clear message could be deciphered, even with my best code-breaking skills. I noticed she still hadn't come home, so I gave her a call just to check in and make sure she was okay. It went to voicemail. I texted our other housemate to see if she had heard from H. She replied that they had talked about an hour earlier and that H was having fun and making out with the coworker. Sweet! I went back to sleep, reassured. Around 7 a.m., I woke up to see that H still hadn't returned to our room. While a late night was probably expected, this was unlike her. A bad feeling crept in as I got up to take a shower. I walked into the bathroom and started brushing my teeth. The room smelled awful, and I assumed the other housemate had just used it. I opened the window, hoping to air it out, but the stench was overpowering. I moved into the hallway to finish brushing while waiting for the smell to dissipate. Much to my dismay, the smell had seeped into the hallway. I started gagging. Jesus, this must have been a monster mess left behind. It was so raw, so pungent, that there was no way I could shower in there. I decided to make coffee instead, hoping the kitchen would offer a reprieve. As I started prepping the coffee, the smell grew even more potent. Panic started to set in. I feared I had somehow crapped the bed. I frantically searched, but found no evidence of wrongdoing, and my mind began to spiral. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flash of blue. I turned and saw Heike's blue sequined dress from the night before lying on the laundry room floor. Oh, thank God she was alive. I stepped closer and noticed mud smattered across the floor near the dress. It must have rained last night, I thought. I stood up and for the first time all morning really looked around. Mud. No, it wasn't just mud, was everywhere. Streaks ran across the washing machine and dryer. Streaks on the walls? Were those arrows? Were they pointing to the laundry room? Yes, both answers were yes. The stench hit me like a punch. My eyes watered. The smell of crap was coming from the mud. Oh God, that was not mud. I slowly backed up, trying to process what I was seeing, and started toward the bathroom. Along the way, streaks covered the walls, all pointing back in the direction I had just come from. In the bathroom, the floor near the toilet was smeared, and the glass shower door was no exception. Panic set in. Hetch had been here, her dress was here, her mess was here. But she was not. My mind went to the worst-case scenario. She was out there, running without clothes through the streets, covered in her own crap. I darted over to the other housemate's room and knocked. No answer. Heart racing, I barged in. I woke the other housemate and her boyfriend, filling them in on what I had found, desperate to locate H and make sure she was okay. Their faces were strange, puzzled, almost too calm for the situation I had just walked into. I expected alarm, panic, something. Instead, the other housemate said, 10 yachts. You promised not to get mad. In a hurry, I said, Of course. Tell me, what's going on? Then, Hatch popped her head up from between the two of them, horror and honesty written all over her face. My brain short-circuited. What? She explained, shaking, that she didn't remember anything clearly except coming home and fooling around with the other housemate. According to them, this had all happened about an hour ago. And the bathroom, the mud. Hage had showered before making her move, which apparently explained why no one had seen the evidence until now. She apologized profusely, clearly mortified. I sighed, told them to call me after disinfecting the house and gathering my things, and headed to Starbucks. I deserved it. I sat down and mainlined 2 chocolate chip cookies for breakfast, because honestly, I really deserved it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.